Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Governance, Audit and Standards Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Ian Holder, Chair of this committee. I'd like to draw your attention to the following. Housekeeping. If a continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust's fire marshal regulations, if you are signed into the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. Live web streaming. May I remind everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed, and can I please remind all attendees to turn their microphones on to speak and then off again once you've finished speaking. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Now, please can I ask members and officers to introduce themselves, starting to my left.
Peter Bell, City Solicitor.
Councillor Stuart Brown, Fratton Ward, and Vice Chair of the Committee.
Gerald Van Jackson, Milton Ward, and a sub for Richard Adair at this meeting.
Councillor Russell Simpson, Hilsey Ward.
Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance.
Charlotte Smith, Assistant Director of Corporate Services. Cameron Fitzgerald, Complaints Officer.
Christine Thomas, Corporate Customer Services Manager.
Richard Locke, Assistant Director for Procurement.
Ian Fitchett, Electoral Services Manager.
Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor.
Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Auditor.
Helen Magri, Data Protection Officer.
James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer.
Thank you. We've just received one apology so far from Councillor Richard Adair, and I think Gerald's subbing for him today. And declaration.
Only in the business of being a councillor, not in other parts of his life.
Glad to hear. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare in respect of the items to be considered at today's meeting? No. Okay then. Minutes of the meeting held on 10th of July 2024. Members happy that I signed the previous minutes as an accurate record? Thank you. I'll sign those in. Afternoon. Would you like to introduce yourself, and do you have anything to declare?
First of all, apologies for my lateness. Councillor Spencer Gardner, Drayton and Farlington Ward, Portsmouth. No declarations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So, on to agenda item 4, review of polling districts and polling places. So, hand over to Ian if you've got anything to... Members have read the report, I think, so have you got anything to add?
I can give a brief summary. So the purpose of the review is to look at the configuration of polling districts and the allocation of polling places within them. Regulations actually require that we complete a review this year. We've been proactive in undertaking these reviews to make sure arrangements are appropriate and up to date. We completed the reviews in 2022, 2023. On that basis, we believe there are no issues to be addressed at this point, so no changes are recommended in the report. That said, we also have another review going on in the city, being undertaken by the Boundary Commission, which is looking at the future ward arrangements. That review will make some significant changes to the city's ward boundaries. Final recommendations will be made next July. So following that boundary review, there will be a further review of polling districts, polling places, to reconfigure the polling districts to match up with those revised ward boundaries. So this is kind of a placeholder, if you like, in advance of a fuller review following the boundary review, if that makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Members, any questions?
Not a question, just a comment. I think Ian's absolutely right, and it's eminently sensible that with no elections coming up in May 2025, and then there's the all-outs on new boundaries, which we have no idea yet what they will look like, not making any changes this year is perfectly reasonable.
Thank you. One question, it was just something that jumped out at me. There was a 6-week consultation, but only one formal response. Is that usual?
it's not entirely unusual. The returning officer has to make representations. Generally, when we get feedback, it's in response to proposals made. So where there were no proposals made, therefore there weren't any comments to them.
So in previous years, ward councillors have given specific feedback when there have been proposed changes to polling stations in their own wards. Like I worked with Ian quite a lot on the Fratton ones in the previous years, but as he says, there weren't any proposals. So,
Thank you. Gerald?
Well, we did do a formal consultation some years ago about whether we should have an elected mayor or not, and we had 2 responses, one in favour and one against. I think one of them was from Donna.
Anyone else? No? Thank you, Ian. Members, I recommend that the Governance, Audit and Standards Committee recommends to full council that no changes are made to the current polling scheme for the reasons set out in the report, and that it be reconfirmed that returning officer has delegated authority to make such variations to polling places as may be necessary arising from the availability of premises for use at a particular election. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. And is that agreed? Thank you. So, yes. On to item 5, Complaints Policy Review. Charlotte Smith, Assistant Director of Corporate Services, is in attendance to present the report and answer any questions we may have. Charlotte, members have read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly to say, obviously the purpose is to provide the committee with our updated report, our updated policy and process, which is very much in line with the code of practice from the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman, to seek your approval of that. We do a regular review of our policy. We postponed it to incorporate the outcome of a recent LGO consultation and subsequent changes to their code. So we wanted to make sure that we maintained in line with that. Very briefly, the changes we've added, we've essentially added a better definition of service requests. So when our customers make a complaint, which we can actually manage as a service request, we're a lot clearer about what that looks like. And then we've changed our emphasis around stage 1 complaints, so they are less about necessarily having an investigation and more about responding proportionately to the kind of nature of the complaints. It gives us more flexibility to respond to the customer more quickly and in a way that meets their needs. And as we do this, we'll ensure that we maintain quality of our responses by our robust quality assurance processes, etc. And then the policy allows us essentially we'll have to escalate complaints to stage 2 automatically. We no longer have the opportunity to say no to complaint escalation, and so we'll have more robust investigations at stage 2. It will make a bit of a difference to the reporting that comes to the committee, because we're anticipating more service requests means fewer stage 1 complaints potentially. So you may see some changes in the data when we bring our annual complaints reports to you, but we'll be implementing a new process to capture those service requests which came in as complaints, so that you'll be able to see what that looks like. And there is potential for more stage 2 complaints as a result of changes in the way the complaints are escalated. But again, we'll continue to support directorates to provide those robust responses at stage 1, because obviously the priority is we get the customer a satisfactory response at the earliest opportunity. So we'll continue to monitor that closely.
Thank you. Members? Oh, sorry. Councillor Smythe? No problem. Do you have any declarations of interest? Thank you. Members, any questions? No? Nothing from me, I don't think. There's a bit of confusion about the social media section. It said that that making complaint via social media has been removed, then later on it's still as a way of making a complaint?
So the LGO, through their consultation, understood from councils that the fact that they had specifically included in their previous code that we had to allow complaints via social media was causing confusion, because their previous code also said we had to treat any expression of dissatisfaction as a complaint. Well, as anyone who looks at social media will know, pretty much every comment is an expression of dissatisfaction, and some councils were tying themselves in knots dealing with comments on social media as complaints. So they've kind of clarified that and said we have to accept complaints made through all avenues, but not that we have to accept any expression of dissatisfaction through social media as a complaint. So that's why.
Okay, thank you. So nothing for anyone else? Judith?
Have you done the first item?
Yeah, we're on complaints policy, item 5. Yeah.
Didn't have any comments on the first paper.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. If there's nothing else. Members, I propose that new complaints policy is approved for implementation from 1st of November 2024. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. And is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Now on to item 6, overview of Portsmouth City Council complaints, including local government and social care ombudsman's complaints from 2023-2024. Christine Thomas, Corporate Customer Services Manager, is in attendance to present the report and to answer any questions that we may have. Christine, members have read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
I can give a summary. So the purpose of this report is to provide the committee the annual review of complaints by the local government and social care ombudsman regarding the complaints it's considered against Portsmouth City Council for the year 23-24, and to provide an overview, a review of complaints for the same period. I'd like to highlight the increase in the number of complaints received across both Stage 1 and Stage 2 complaints of 17% and 3.4% respectively. The trends by directorate are shown with increases spread across most directorates, with the differences shown as a percentage. The report breaks down the trends within directorates that had an increase year on year, including what learnings have been actioned to rectify complaints with the aim to reduce ongoing complaints. The proportion of complaints escalated to Stage 2 remains low, suggesting more than 80% of our customers are satisfied with the response to their complaint at Stage 1. And this reflects the work done by the Council to improve the quality of complaint responses at Stage 1. The response rates are lower than our 80% target and are affected by the complexity of complaints and by staff capacity, and would expect adherence to increase when the new policy is in place, as we'll be able to set a timescale at the outset that reflects the complexity of the complaint, with the performance being measured against the timescale set. The number of complaints made by the LGSCO has remained low, despite changes to our complaints policy in 2021 to remove Stage 3 complaints process, which suggests our Stage 2 responses are also sufficiently robust. And the complaints made to the LGSCO resulted in 11 investigations, with 91% of these upheld, with Portsmouth City Council implementing recommendations in all cases, and a summary of the upheld complaints has been included with the learnings and actions taken as a result. Actions taken as a result include reviewing and amending processes, reviewing and amending the way information is recorded, updating training and guidance for staff, and improving communications. I'd also like to highlight the percentage of upheld cases where satisfactory remedy implemented before the complaint was reached LGSCO was at 0%. The Council's responses at Stage 2 to the upheld LGSCO complaints have been reviewed to better understand why the remedies were not offered in advance of LGSCO's recommendations. And in the cases upheld by the LGSCO, our Stage 2 investigations concluded that the Council had acted appropriately, which is why early remedies were not offered. In the light of the LGSCO investigations, the Council's looked again at its responses, applied all the recommended remedies, and looked at additional learning from the upheld complaints, with summaries that can be found in Section 10. I'd like to ask if there's any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson?
Yeah, I'm quite interested in 9.8, education, special education needs. One of the questions really is, I know normally when they're not academies, it's a lot easier to sometimes deal with these complaints, in the sense of looking into what's going on and how the children are not getting support. But what is our relationship with academies when it comes to this process of complaints, if they are complaining, if residents, not customers, are complaining?
I don't think we know the answer to that. We don't deal with complaints in relation to academies. And I think 9.8 was in relation to an EHCP assessment, which obviously there have been some delays around that, but I don't know that that was related to the fact that it was an academy.
Just very quickly, just because
Yeah.
I just know it's always been very, very difficult to help children with and parents with special needs at schools when it comes to academies, because it seems to be like a gate, but a gate across and halfway across the bridge. So I'm just really curious of what we do and how we deal with that. And Judith.
Well, I was going to ask the same question, Chair, or similar. I think it is a. I was going to ask first. Can I just backtrack a bit and then come back to your question? Is the what percentage of the complaints that we're seeing under Education, Children and Families are to do with the health and social care plan? Do we know?
I don't know that information, but we can find out.
It does imply that that is the reason for the high number of complaints in that section. If you look at page 63, I think it is, that the plus 152%, 38, and it does say this was related to significant delays in the education, health and care plan process for children with SEND. But I do think we need to note that that's very serious, because that affects individual children. And I don't believe that process is any different for children at academies or at ordinary schools at all. It is about getting a series of professionals in to assess the needs of the child, and then to say whether or not they go above the threshold of need and therefore have an education, health and care plan. They were called education, health and social care plans because in the old days people used to get 5 plans on the fridge, each one from each one professional, and this demands the professions to work together on it, but it has proven to be rather a slow process. And I do think Portsmouth has this particular problem and is an outlier of this particular. I'm drawing on experience from past life here, but I think we have a particular issue, and probably, Russell, perhaps we could, if they are going to find out about that, because it's a very serious thing for children who do have special education needs, we could ask that question and a supplement that said, does it make any difference? Are children worse off if they go to academies or whatever? Would be a useful thing to find out.
Yeah, I've had a number of...
But I think the answer to that particular question is not... I don't think it's to do with the academies, but it might be, so let's find out.
No, I've just had experiences where the child in the end is not getting the support they need and they've had to move on somewhere else, and complaints doesn't seem to do anything. They just give up, and it's just really sad that that's the process at the moment.
Could you report back on that, give us a bit more detail at a later date?
We can ask the service, because the issue with bringing, obviously we can bring the complaints report and complaints information, but we can't answer for the service in relation to the issues that they've had and have acknowledged that they've had with the education, health and care plan process. And we know that they've had issues with resourcing the level of demand for EHCPs within the education team. So we can go back to them and ask them to provide a greater level of information that we can send back to the committee, but we obviously don't have the answers ourselves.
Thank you.
I think it is a matter of enormous concern to families. And I mean, up to a point, if as a parent you suspect a child has got a special education need or a particular mental difficulty, particularly around things like depression and so forth, and it can't be quick enough. But I do think it has got out of kilter here, and we are probably taking far too long. And if I was a parent in that situation, I'd be going round the bend, I think.
Councillor Brown, you had a question, didn't you?
Thank you, Chair. My question is sort of more of a bookkeeping style question than a policy one. So obviously, in section 4, it says that in the 2023-24 year, 653 complaints were received. But if my maths is right, that's the stage 1s and the stage 2s added together. So it's actually not 653 complainants, because some of those will be the same people progressing from stage 1
That's
to stage
correct.
2. So I'm assuming that the reason we report it as a combined number is because that's enable us doing like-for-like comparisons with previous years?
Yes. And then we can see, we break it down later for the stage 1 and stage 2, but we've dealt with that many complaints during the annual period because the stage 1 is one set of dates and then stage 2 is almost doing the process again.
So they're almost treated as separate cases rather than
Correct.
a continuation of an existing one?
Yes.
But that does mean that 461 were dealt with at stage 1 and concluded?
557 were stage 1.
Yeah, of which 96 progressed to stage 2, so the other
Correct.
461 were dealt with just under a stage 1 issue. They weren't needed to progress.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that minus that, yeah.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Thank you, Gerald.
Can we get back to the complaints about special educational needs stuff? Because I think it's an area it would be sensible for us to keep an eye on. It's a huge national problem, and many councils are at significant risk of going bust because of it. At the LGA, there's work going on to look at reforming the system completely because the demand is growing and growing and growing in a completely unsustainable way. But that's going to mean that people will, there are likely to be more complaints that are going to come our way because of that. And I think as well I think we also have a slightly different view in Portsmouth where we have an expectation no, actually, no, that's a difference. Let me not complicate things, but I just think let's keep things simple. But I think it's an area it'd be very sensible for us to keep a very close eye on, because it is a big national problem. My sister is now leaves the opposition in Devon, and I think they are looking at £120 million overspend on home to school transport because of special educational needs, and they're not alone. So we are very lucky that we've come up with an underspend, but it is a huge problem nationally.
Russell?
Yeah, I think Councillor, what Gerald has said is correct. I think it's more parents and residents know where they stand. You know, if they ring about housing and they say, well, it's a 2-year waiting list or an allotment and it's a 3-year waiting list. I think that's more of what I found from a lot of residents coming to me is that they hear nothing back. They don't know where they stand with it. What should they do? And they end up just like many things are, well, the council hasn't answered, they're not going to help us, and they just move on. So I think it's more about trying to do our job best we can, but with the limits that we have, but at least giving the residents and the parents know where they are. So I think that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? No? Okay, thank you.
Just one very short thing. It's also quite good to note the increase in compliments as well as complaints.
Yes, that's very good. So, is the report noted, members? Thank you. Thank you. On to item 7, Data Security Breaches Report. Helen Magri, Corporate Information Governance and Data Protection Officer, is in attendance to present the report and answer any questions we may have. Helen, is there anything you want to add to the report?
Nothing much to add to the report. It's a report that comes to this committee every 6 months. The main thing to note is the increase in the number of breaches reported, but as I've said in my report, this might be as a result of reminders going out to all staff, on the importance of reporting breaches. We won't know that for sure, but we will continue to monitor that trend. All of the other trends reported in the appendix are consistent with previous periods and national trends, so there's nothing much to note other than that increase. But happy to take your questions if you have any.
Thank you. The report said there was 12 breaches that were not reported within 72 hours. Do we know anything background to those, why they weren't?
The delay is caused when staff don't fully know what the reason for the breach is or even whether it is a breach. So that was part of the reason for the communication, asking staff as soon as they think there might be a breach to let us know, and then we can look further to see whether it is a breach. So sometimes it's just not apparent from the outset. For example, if a letter has been sent out and not received, that's got to be investigated. Is it that it actually didn't get sent out? Is it that, you know, it went to the wrong address? You know, so from the outset, it's not always clear whether a breach has occurred. So we've asked staff to let us know as soon as they think something has gone wrong, and then we will take the action of reporting it to the Information Commissioner, even if we're not sure at the outset, but if there's a potential that it could amount to a serious breach, which, as you see from the report, none of those reported to the corporate team amounted to a serious breach as defined by the Information Commissioner. So.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Judith.
Just a general question about what do we do about things. The corrective action is does it include training, and how successful is the training?
Yes, it does include training. It's every single breach that is reported to the corporate team gets reviewed, and we work with that team. We'll go back to that team and identify what the root cause of the breach was, and discuss with them any changes that can be made to prevent a reoccurrence of something similar. If it's something that could affect all staff, then you know we communicate that across the council through various means. Communications out to all staff by email. So every single one of those breaches we will be looking at to see how it happened and what can be done to prevent something happening.
And do the breaches come from the same person or over and over again, or not?
No, very, very rarely the same person. As you'll see from the report, the same directorate, yes. You'll see the higher numbers of breaches in areas like children's social care, but that's reflective of the amount of data and the number of staff dealing with that data.
I think that's to be expected, but it's not the same repeat offenders as individuals.
Very rarely. Very rarely. Occasionally it has been a same member of staff, but appropriate action has been taken in terms of training if that's the case, but very rarely has that been the case. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Noticed quite a few number of the breaches were because of emails being sent to the wrong person. Is there anything that could be done to improve that?
That is a national trend, probably worldwide. We have been working with our IT department. There are various data loss prevention tools available through the Microsoft Office license that we have. So we've been looking at warning messages that can be that can pop up when you go to send an email. So it's really smart. It can detect what sort of information is contained in an email. So, for example, if the email contains an NHS number or a national insurance number, we can set those parameters up and ask it to check the email for that sort of sensitive personal data, and then produce a prompt to the sender before it gets sent saying, well, there's a range of measures that we can take. You can either block the email, you can ask the sender to check the recipient, or any sort of number of different messages. So we are looking at that with IT. There are lots of priorities with IT at the moment, but recently we have introduced a prompt where a message is going outside of the authority. So a prompt will come up to say that you're sending this outside of the organisation, check who you're sending it to, and also when you've attached something to check that the attachment is correct. So it's a case of trying to get those prompts proportionate so that people do actually read them, because otherwise if they pop up every time someone sends a message, they end up not reading it. So it's trying to get that balance right. But it is really difficult, and a lot of the breaches where people have sent them to the wrong person occur where you're going to send an email, you start typing the recipient, and you get a drop-down list of people who sort of begin with those letters that you've typed in, and you perhaps have picked the wrong one. So we've talked about whether that could be disabled, but then you have the challenge of someone completely incorrectly typing the email address, and it happens to be a valid email address, and then it's gone to the wrong person anyway. So it's really difficult to get that balance, and obviously, you know, whilst helping staff to do their job and do it quickly, it's quite difficult to get that balance right. But we are looking at all of those measures that are available, as I say, through the Microsoft Office licence.
Thank you. Judith?
I noticed that relatively recently we have that drop down when we send council emails about whether it's officially sensitive, politically sensible. I mean, and I must say I've never had any training on that. I don't understand what they all mean. I'd take a wild guess. But I also wondered what you do with that information and whether that would be the cause of a data non-compliance.
There is some information on intranet about those markings, and that is something that came about with the new Microsoft license. It just, yes, it can, when we're sending an email, so we're saying it is official sensitive, then we can program our system to pick up on those and to add additional prompts. We haven't done that yet, but that is something that is possible to do. So that it's relevant for those data loss prevention tools. So you could add additional prompts where somebody has marked an item as official sensitive. You could add some additional prompts. But it does also tell the recipient how they should deal with that information. And there is guidance on intranet about those markings.
Certainly as an elected member, I didn't receive any guidance about that, and I just make wild guesses. But, I mean, I don't know if everybody else is word perfect on this who's on the council, but it seems to me unlikely.
We can make sure that information reaches councillors on that, if that's something you'd like.
Yeah, I think it'd be useful because I just guess usually.
Okay.
Yeah, it kind of came out of nowhere, to be honest. I mean, it would be good just if we had a none either at the bottom, so you could have the 4 and then none, like it was normally sending an email. I mean, I don't want to sound flippant about it, but I was also expecting a emoticon or something. How am I feeling? Russell Simpson's feeling happy as he's sending this email, but I think it would be good to have an option of having none there when you're just replying to, you know, a resident about something that's.
I think there is actually.
I don't think there is. There isn't. There's just 4, and all of them sound quite. That's scary. Yeah. Okay. So it might be easier just to normalise it a little bit.
And it makes me ask the question, well, it's officially sensitive in some ways, but it's not in others, or different circumstances would give you a different answer.
Yeah, I think some clear guidance would be useful.
Okay. Yeah, I can make sure that gets done. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Nope. So this was just a noting report. Is the report noted, members? Thank you. Right. On to agenda item 8, Internal Audit Performance Status Report to 16th of September 2024. Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Auditor, and Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor, are in attendance to introduce the report and answer questions. Members have read the report. Is there anything you wish to add?
Thank you, Chair. Just to briefly take you through the report, it is our standard progress report that we bring to every committee. I'll give you a progress against the audit plan that we agreed in February. You'll see in section 4 we have made substantial changes to the audit plan, which we do most years, and there's narrative there as to why we've made those changes for the additions and the ones that have been removed. There's no significant areas of concern that we're bringing to you, but for those of you who have been on the committee a while will notice that hire cars is in again and limited assurance. There was improvement on the previous year's audit results, but it is still limited, so I just wanted to bring that to the committee's attention. The only other new thing that we've introduced in the report is a table in section 10, which is our exception implementation tracking. This is a new tool that we've introduced to make sure that we can keep an eye on the medium and low risk exceptions that we don't, as standard, follow up in the next financial year. So that's a new table that will be in the reports that gives you the kind of feedback on those ones to make sure that they're not falling off the radar. Wasn't proposing to say much else, but happy to take any questions.
Gerald?
2 questions. A, I understand you do lots of work for other councils. How much money do you make for us? Not, well, to the nearest pound, shilling and pence would be useful. And secondly, it looked as if you were having to drop various things and replace them with others, where there's lots of work to do an audit that supports a grant that comes in. I was just wondering, is that normal? And if it is it just not sensible within the audit plan to have a lump of time just set aside for assurance in relation to grants from external bodies, so that you've got some space within your working time to be able to programme that in without having to drop other pieces of work?
So to the nearest pound.
Well, no, I take shilling.
Okay. It's actually 500,000 that we bring in via.
So you're highly profitable.
We are highly profitable. In relation to your other query regarding the grants, is we'll only really get involved in the grants when there is a requirement for either the Chief Internal Auditor and the Chief Executive to physically sign something off. There are many, many grants to which our finance colleagues will be able to kind of wax lyrics on regarding the volume of money that comes into the organisation. I think that's a reasonable point about putting in a contingent time, because inevitably we have visibility on a considerable number of the grants, but there are a number of the grants where there are pockets within the organisation that I think that do have visibility, but they don't have visibility on who requires to sign it off until the last minute, which is why they come to the fore with us and get added in. But yeah, we could consider doing that.
It might be a good idea, it might be a rubbish idea.
Thank you, Gerald.
Any other places that we might work for that might make you even more profitable? I know Mr. Balfe is very expensive and we have to see if we can make profits elsewhere.
I would say currently we are stretched to capacity, although there are a number of smaller organisations that may well be approaching us, but we don't know at this stage. But we would need additional resource to take on more.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson.
Did we miss out 8? Just because we were talking about data security breaches, and then have we already gone to 9 already? No, we are at 8. Okay, good. Good, because if you went about grants and you're on page 122, you've really thrown me off.
I'm just ahead of you, Russell.
I always pick one up, but this one is mainly because of the time of the year. So number 9, damp and mould in housing. Obviously, we went from a 4 high to a 1 high, which is brilliant. So very much well done on that. But obviously, we still do have 1 high. We still have 1 high. What's the word I'm looking for? Concern. And it says here the highlighted cases where tenant welfare could be a concern was found to be in progress. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that, considering we're coming to that time of the year?
Yes, certainly. That one was the initial concern came in that noted a welfare concern, and then when we looked at the sample, it hadn't been noted in the final report. It was more of a lack of evidence rather than it wasn't considered. It was more that the evidence was lacking rather than it wasn't not concerned. They had spoken to the resident and covered that off. It just wasn't in the data, so they couldn't evidence it had been done. So that was why it still remained open.
Are we expecting? I mean, I'm guessing the solutions we have used have greatly reduced damp and mould in these properties. I mean, are we expecting that to be equally successful this winter or this autumn winter, or do we have any concerns?
We have regular dialogue with housing around damp and mould, but it's not something that I could really comment on.
Can I just add a little tiny bit, though, as well, in relation to the damp and mould? When we initially performed the review at damp and mould, there were some gaps within the processes and the systems that were set up. So I think we have more comfort that those systems and processes now are in place. There will always be potentially a little bit of a flux with how effective they are with the arrangements. So the new results kind of reflect the fact that that framework is more robust, and it was something that they'd been working on, and it was also something that the director themselves had kind of flagged James Hill had said, can we have some visibility and work in and around? So, yeah, it's difficult.
Thank you. I know you joked about being stretched to the limit. The new audit plans, you've got capacity to do that this year, or is that going to carry over?
We do have current capacity, but it's difficult, isn't it, if we have unexpected absences. Obviously, I view Portsmouth as being the mothership, so we will always make certain that there is sufficient coverage, but obviously we need to be mindful that we are under contract with a number of the others. But at present, we have one temporary position which we are attempting to fill to try and alleviate some of the capacity issues that we have, and we have a number of newer individuals that are less experienced, but they're coming along nicely.
Members, any other questions? No. Where are we? Members, it is recommended that the Governance and Audit and Standards Committee notes the audit performance for 2024 to the 16th of September 2024. Noted. Thank you. And now on to...
You might add that there was some discussion about the outsourced services, and we were pleased to see that that was bringing money to the council.
Yep.
But there were some concerns about level of resourcing.
Yep, James can add that. No problem.
I'm not sure there was concern about the level of resourcing. I think it was. I think that it was being kept an eye on, and that we wouldn't take on work if there wasn't the resource to be able to do it, which I think is a better way of expressing it. As saying,
But in fact, that's not what Lizzie said. She said if we have absences,
We are resourced to cover all of the requirements, but you can never factor in unexpected absences. And I think if we had anything significant, I would be coming back to the committee to flag to you, alongside obviously flagging to Section 151 officer that we may have a problem with delivering what we need to cover in relation to Portsmouth, but also in relation to the clients. But equally, it is correct that we couldn't really take on anything in addition without there being additional resource.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 9, Treasury Management Monitoring Report for the first quarter of 2024-25. Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance and Resources, and Helen Clem, Finance Manager, are in attendance to introduce the report and answer any questions. Is there anything you wish to add or expand on?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just give you the highlights of this report, if I may. This is our quarterly monitoring report, which we bring to this committee, and it's for the end of quarter one, as it's the end of the 30th of June. At that point in time, and still now, we're still operating within our operational and authorised boundaries for borrowing. We've not taken on any new borrowing this year. We don't anticipate the need to do so either. We've had no breaches of our policy. And we are in a sensible liquid position for the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Members? Gerald?
Probably because interest rates are so high, we haven't swapped out any borrowing and swapped in at a lower rate, which I know we've done in previous years to save ourselves money. At what point do we start doing that again?
Thank you for that question. Yes, we haven't changed any borrowing, or as you suggest, for the reasons you suggest. We do keep it under close monitoring, and where we feel that there is an opportunity to benefit from doing that, we will do. But it will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis.
Can I go back to my question? At what point, and is there a number at which point things are triggered in your minds?
I haven't got a specific figure in my mind, but we would look at each individual borrowing where it needs to be assessed against what we'd previously taken out before we could consider whether it was beneficial. So, but at the current time, we haven't considered it to be beneficial, but we will start monitoring that more closely as rates start to fall.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members? No? Gerald?
I just thought it'd be worth saying, it's good to see you're making so much more profit in terms of percentage that we pay out than we get in. So I thought that was really good. So on 306 million of ours that we lend out, we make 4 million quid profit. 730 we borrow, we pay 6.1 million in interest. So we're making proportionately more profit, which is really good. Could we have more?
Are there any concerns with current events in the Middle East? Are there any contingencies for how that may impact us?
We do not have any borrowing or lending with countries in the Middle East at the moment, so it's not something that we have concerns about.
Thank you. Any members, any more questions? No, it's good to hear that we're still staying within policy. Where are we? Members, it's recommended that the Council's Treasury Management activities have remained within the Treasury Management Policy 2024-2025 in the period up to 30th of June 2024, and the actual Treasury Management indicators as at 30th of June 2024 set out in Appendix A be noted. Is the report noted, members? Thank you. And on to, thank you, John, to agenda item 10, Procurement Act 2023 and Contract Procedure Rules. So Richard Locke, Assistant Director of Procurement, is in attendance to introduce the report and answer questions. Members have read the report, and is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
I can give a quick summary, if that's okay, Chair. So the purpose of the report is to give an overview of the drivers behind the forthcoming changes to procurement legislation. As you'll note within the report, there has been another delay to the legislation coming in, so we had to make some very quick changes to the report. Apologies if some of the grammar is not as it would be usually. It's now going to come into play on the 24th of February, is what the Labour government has suggested through the Cabinet Office. So it's here to give a sort of overview of the main changes and drivers, some information around what we're doing as a council to prepare. The main ask of the committee today is to give permission for us to start revising our contract procedure rules. So under Local Government Act 1972, we have to have rules in place as part of our constitution, and a requirement of those rules is that they reflect current legislation. So we need to bring ours up to date. And we'll be seeking, if it's okay with the committee, to commence work on those contract procedure rules, bring them back to committee for the February meeting, to then allow them to go to full council to be adopted into the constitution and go live from April. As the committee might note, that does leave a bit of a gap between the current date of the Act coming into force and the changes to our CPRs coming into force into the constitution. So the paper does also set out the mitigation measures to help us ensure that in that small period we don't end up in a situation where we wouldn't be compliant with the legislation.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Judith.
This is really important stuff, and I think we sometimes I think we could use a little bit more time for detailed discussion of this. Does this take into account the findings of the current inquiry that the government are doing about procurement of COVID paraphernalia like PPE and masks and things? Because I would imagine that the current inquiry will bring forth some new amendments, and is that already taken in here?
In relation to inquiries, the inquiry will put forward a number of recommendations, but it won't have a position as a court would do to actually put forward things that could actually lead to things that would mean suppliers could be excluded. So that's also relevant to the inquiry which has come out in relation to Grenfell recently.
Yes.
So not specifically towards inquiries, however, from the Act, there's a number of new things that will come into play that will allow contracting authorities to exclude suppliers. And also there is a new arm which is going to be part of the Cabinet Office called the Procurement Review Unit. That will enable government to bar suppliers who have potentially been guilty of corporate manslaughter from bidding for public contracts, which isn't there at the moment. There'll be a thing called a debarment list. It will also start bringing in cross-public sector means of barring suppliers who have poorly performed on contracts. That's more of a discretionary measure. You can't just use it across the board when it comes in the future. Each case will be slightly different, so it needs to be proportionate and relevant. But there certainly will be new levers that we'll have available to us in order to take action at a local level, and there will be significant levers that will enable government to take action on a cross-public sector level.
I'm very reassured to hear that.
Judith, microphone.
You say on page 1 that page 130 that it will open up public procurement to new entrants such as small businesses and social enterprises so that they can compete for and win more public contracts. And I'm particularly interested there in our ability to decide or only put on a small job tendering local businesses so that our procurement reflects in the improvements in the local economy and so on. And once you've answered that, I might ask a question about other ways of adding social and economic and environmental value.
Okay. So one thing to bear in mind with the Procurement Act is we are still, post-Brexit, we are still signed up to World Trade Organization and various other treaties. So as you'll note within the paper, there are statutory thresholds above which it's quite hard to positively discriminate in relation to local businesses. However, those thresholds are pretty high, particularly for works. It's over £5 million. With our own contract procedure rules, which we only updated as at last year, one of the things that we did in preparation for the Procurement Act coming in was to remove any locally imposed advertising thresholds, which would allow us to give greater opportunity to local businesses. So it chimed in with our social value policy. One thing that the government is doing, which is going to give greater confidence to us on a legislative basis to do things like that, is they are also going to be seeking to change an aspect of the Local Government Act, which was problematic, as anyone may recall, of the Ukraine crisis when we had the Gazprom contract. Central government could effectively bar organisations based upon geography, whether it is of the organisation or the controlling owners of the organisation. But there was things within the Local Government Act that actually stopped us from doing that. You couldn't discriminate positively on that basis. They are going to change the Local Government Act as well. We don't have the exact date on that, but that is something that's definitely going to come through as well. So there will be more levers that will come in and more of a focus towards social value. It's interesting from the Labour government's statement on why they have delayed the Act, which is to look at national procurement policy statement, because they didn't feel that the current statement goes far enough in terms of maximising value for money, local economic benefit, social value. So it'll be interesting where they go with that. The current procurement policy statement is you see from the link to it, is very top level. Labour government is going to do a wholesale revision, it appears to be, of that. It might be more prescriptive, but it certainly should be leading more towards local economic, social value benefits.
Thank you. And just a supplement to that, we are trying in Portsmouth to be, and I think, corporately in some ways we're doing very well in becoming greener, reducing the carbon footprint. Procurement can make a huge difference to that. How much are you able to put in the preliminaries to any contracts that you have requirements that contractors have green procurement, travel, other green policies to contribute to reducing the carbon footprint, particularly in Portsmouth, but also more generally?
Okay. So we take a sort of proportionate relevant approach to each procurement. Any procurement of a value above £150,000 gets caught within the council's gateway process, so it has a procurement professional, a legal professional assigned to work with the service area. And within the procurement gateway process, there is a pre-procurement gate, which is the gateway A, which is the whole business case section. And a whole part of that is around how does what we're purchasing align with our strategic priorities, best practice, and a big focus on that is towards environmental. So it won't be the same answer depending on what we're purchasing. So it could be a very different answer in relation to a stationary supply, where you'll be looking at the actual sustainable environmental performance of the materials that we're purchasing and transportation. When it comes into, say, potentially a social care contract, it will be a different thrust on that. That might be more towards how if it's if you have staff that are moving around the city to visit, what's being done there to potentially reduce travel and so forth. So we do focus onto it, but we don't have a kind of one-size-fits-all basis. And that seems to work quite well, rather than applying something that might work very, very well on one particular contract and then trying to make that apply onto something else. We could actually end up creating a bit of a burden.
I mean, just in general, Chair, I would like to see us strengthening some of these things and certainly strengthening our knowledge of these sorts of things, because we do spend a decent amount of money outsourcing, and it's right that we do. We've bought some contracts in-house recently, which I think was very good. But nevertheless, it's amazing how much not doing this business case, the gateway, the procurement gateway clearly, and I think proportionally you're right, and it's different for different businesses. We are missing a trick on influencing both behaviour and culture, but also the actual measurable carbon footprint of the work that they do. Let me get, and now just to give you a little brief example, I did the scrutiny panel for pesticides last year, and one of the things that was surprising and difficult, potentially, is that we have a contract with Colas to maintain the highways, including the landscape around highways and stopping weeds clogging up the roads, that sort of thing. And it seemed to be an insuperable problem that we couldn't work on the contract, which I think is 3/4 of the way through, correct me if I'm wrong, to stop them using pesticides on Portsmouth roads, because there are other ways of doing it. And I was just really surprised that the Colas wasn't doing it for other authorities. I imagined a lot of other authorities would be asking the same question quite quicker than we had particularly, and would be very keen to market to us new ways of doing it without using pesticides that after all are very bad for the environment. So I do think sometimes we ought not to be shy of taking a lead in those sorts of things. You know, I'm absolutely the first one to say if a bit of Japanese knotweed comes up in the middle of one of our roads, we should get rid of it probably at this stage with pesticides. But we use it much too much on verges and other things, and it does seem to me that the contracting process in that case has got in the way. I wondered how you reacted to that and whether you could see a way of
it will be easier under this legislation because it's a slight finessing of the award criteria, but currently it's most economically advantageous tenders, which allows you to take account of quality and cost and so forth, but there's a key word in there, economic. The new Act brings in most advantageous tender, and that gives much greater legitimacy to inclusion of environmental benefit, social benefit, local economic benefit, and so forth. So, yeah, we'll be in a much better place to do that. At the moment, we do through our social value policy and just through good work on specifications anyway, bring in environmental performance. We hardwire it into specifications quite often and bring it in through social value aspects as well. So it's in place in terms of forward-looking contracts. Some of the older contracts that we have and the Ensign PFI that you mentioned, that is a 25-year arrangement, and sometimes it can be quite problematic where something is on a fixed price basis to potentially come in and make some changes into a contract once it's actually there. It can sometimes get caught up in quite complicated variation mechanisms. But certainly on the ones that we're looking forward on now and under the new Act, there'll be much greater opportunity.
That's really good news. And are we able to do more risk and reward sharing contracts? That's the nature of the thing we've got on the sea defence, which has been so successful there, so that the contractors, particularly for-profit contractors, aren't gaming the system all the time to basically get more additional money variations. Are you doing more of those contracts?
We certainly have a lot more open book contracts. Open book, and sometimes that can be a gain share contract. You have to be quite careful sometimes in where you deploy those types of contracts, because they can still be gamed by the contractors.
Well, yes.
So you do need to be careful around how you make your award and then manage it. So yeah, and I would say Portsmouth, we are quite ahead of the game on our use of open book contracting compared to a lot of our peer authorities. It wouldn't be something that I would say we would introduce across the board, because running an open book contract does come with quite a significant overhead. So for our big strategic contracts where we can partner, where we can deploy that resource that's needed, it does need experienced contract management resource. That is certainly the way in which we seek to go towards. So our major housing repairs and maintenance contracts are all on open book models. Mm-hmm. When we do major engineering schemes, whether that's the South Sea Coastal Scheme or major highways construction schemes, we go towards open book target cost models as well. On some construction schemes we go there as well, but it gets to kind of a tipping point. Generally from £5 million upwards is where it becomes proportionate to start applying open book working to a great degree and starting to use target costing.
That's really good news. That's wonderful. Just the last question I'd written down was the BIFA contract for Leaf It Out has recently been brought in-house, I believe. It turns out that BIFA didn't transfer the information about existing members of the Leaf It Out scheme to the City Council at the end of the contract. How do we make people, after the contract has ended, do the things they need to do? And do we remember that they exited in a careless way that wasn't in the interest of the customer or the local authority afterwards? A lot of us were not on the list because BIFA hadn't passed the contact list back when the contract was terminated. And so it had a personal interest in that, because I couldn't get my garden waste taken away.
Okay, I think in relation to that particular issue, I'd have to go back to the service to find out more, so I wouldn't really be able to answer specifically there. But on a general basis, our contracts include for demobilisation clauses, which means that if we run a retendering process and the incumbent supplier doesn't win, they have legal obligations to provide information, whether that's in relation to employees to help ensure with TUPE obligations, so transfer undertakings protection of employment, whether it is in relation to pass across of demand information and so forth. So it is built in there. We do have a legal position that we can take. It sometimes can be difficult to leverage because if the contractor is outgoing, that they won't necessarily be as incentivised. But we do have those leverage positions. We can potentially withhold payments because it was a contractual obligation. And going forwards with the Procurement Act that's going to come in, if we do withhold payments and it gets to the position where that's actually judged as really poor performance, we'd be obliged to have to divulge that on any contract which is above £5 million. So that will relate to new contracts that we do under the new Act. And there'll be a requirement for us to publicly put performance information out. So that should also help to disincentivise suppliers by not fulfilling their obligations at the end of the contract too.
That's really reassuring. I'd like to thank you. I hasten to say that the problem was sorted out very quickly by our new in-house team on Leave It Out, and my new subscription was set up.
Good.
But they, for example, didn't have any knowledge that I'd received the scheme for free or at all. That's the question I was.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we can now
Councillor Simpson, you had a question?
Well, I feel it's a bit late now.
We agree. Let's go.
No, I mean, it was just in a little bit in relation actually to the pesticide, because I remember when the motion came in 2022 and I actually sat on the panel, and in the end, one of the problems was, number one, it was more expensive, but it wasn't effective either. So you ended up using it more than pesticides. But I think overall, looking outside the box and looking at better contracts and different suppliers probably would be the way to go. But I just thought I'd add that, but it was a bit late because obviously you asked many questions after.
Members, any more questions? I noticed on page 141 on the RAG rating, you've got there's a red one on the new regulations, learning, harmonisation. It's extremely low legal capacity to take this forward. What's in place to help that, improve that?
Well, we've worked with legal to bring in some additional resource, so that we've got a consultant who's going to be assisting in some of the CPR review. It's actually a consultant who lives and breathes contract procedure rules. It's that particular consultant specialism. So that is funded from existing resources. We're not asking for committee to necessarily put anything further onto that to help address it. In terms of the wider things in relation to legal capacity, that's the main one here and how we're treating it. I can't really say much more.
So something's in place, that's good. Members, any more questions? No? In that case, members, I propose that the Governance and Audit and Standards Committee gives the approval to the City Solicitor with support from the Council's Procurement Service to draft the revisions required to bring the Council's CPRs into compliance with the new legal requirements set out within the Procurement Act, and that subject to no further delays to the introduction of the Act being announced by Central Government, the revised CPRs are scheduled for review and endorsement at the 5th of February 2025 committee meeting, and that subject to no further government delays to commencement of the Act and endorsement by the committee, the revised CPRs are scheduled for approval at the 18th of March 2025 full council meeting, and that subject to no further government delays to commencement of the Act and approval at full council, that the revised rules are formally adopted into the Constitution from 1st of April 2025. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brown, thank you. And a show of hands, is that agreed, members?
Could we have a look at those in this committee before they go to
It comes on the 5th of February, back to the committee. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, members. That concludes the business on the agenda for this meeting.